Thanks again for joining me. Today, I'm sitting down with Zach Nadler. Zach is the CEO of VaynerSpeakers. Zach has had an incredible career. He spent a long time with a creative artist agency, CAA. He was working with Gary Vaynerchuk while he was at CAA, who was one of his clients. And now, look where he is now. He's working for Gary Vaynerchuk under one of the Vayner media brands. VaynerSpeakers is one of the brands, and I'm going to let Zach get into it. But of course, this is with the same brands like Vayner Media, VaynerX, Vayner Productions, Vayner Talent. Like the list goes on and on and on. It keeps rolling stuff out. Zach, thanks for sitting down. I'm very excited to understand your story, understand your relationship with Gary, how you sort of graduated from working with CAA to working with Gary, and what you're trying to accomplish with VaynerSpeakers. So let's get into it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me, Scott.
No, it's my pleasure. And I'm very excited to have this chat because your background at CAA was working with. I have to go through the list of some of the people that you've worked with because I don't think you're not gonna showboat as much as you should. You've worked with Academy Award winning actors, actresses, writers, directors, producers, Nobel Prize recipients, Pulitzer Prize winning playwrights, professional and NCAA championships, best selling authors, Grammy award winning musicians, founders, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, US presidents, vice presidents, politicians. My God, like I've never seen somebody who's worked with such notable individuals. So let's speak about how you got into speaker management, if that's the correct term. I don't know. I don't want to butcher it,
Yeah,
but walk me through your career, man.
it. Yeah, I mean, so it's funny, people say those who can't do it themselves teach it. I guess the other side of it is if you can't do it, you represent instead.
Yes.
I've been doing it for a while. I'm a speaker's agent. There are managers nowadays. The industry has evolved a little bit over the years, so there is a little bit of a differentiation. But we're agents. I'm an agent just like anyone else in this world. So rather than representing musicians who are touring, or rather than representing actors who are doing movies, I represent speakers. I get them on stage. I get them paid to deliver a message, and whether it's entertainment or education for corporations, colleges, all sorts of groups. It's never been a bigger industry than it is today. And I'm lucky enough to have worked with some really incredible people. Probably worked with more than I can remember. So you were jogging some memories as you're rattling that off. But it's been a lot of fun. I've had a fun career and working with a lot of interesting people along the way.
How do you get into this type of work? What was your background growing up that made you say, I want to manage speakers? And I'm sure it wasn't that simple. So walk me through it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because no one is 12 years old and says, I want to be a speaker's agent, right? Most people, when you're a little kid, you want to be a firefighter, you want to be a football player, you want to do something that you know and you see. A lot of people don't even know this is an industry. So when I was younger, I was a huge sports nut. I was really passionate. I'm a Boston sports guy and followed all those sports teams. And I wanted to work in that world. I was, not very big. I stopped growing in seventh grade, so I wasn't going to be, a football player, a basketball player, or anything like that. But I was passionate about it. And so I kind of pursued that path. And I went off to college to study sports management. On the very first day, very first class, our professor actually got up in front of the room, asked us how many of you want to be agents or run a team, and every single person raised their hand. And he was like, "Great, none of you are going to have that job." He was like, "Look at the people who do that. They're all former athletes." It was like there's such competition. So, right out of the gate, everyone was kind of like shaking a little bit of what am I going to do? But sure enough, I'm probably one of two people out of that room who actually wound up being an agent. But what wound up happening is, I got my eyes open to a lot more of the industry. And the more I learned, the more I kind of had fun with it. And over time, I actually wound up working for a celebrity golf tour. So I started working with celebrities at a very young age, when I was, 18, 19, 20 years old. And I was doing a lot of different things for that organization. It was a small organization. It was kind of, you had to be all hands on deck. So I got really close to a lot of celebrities, people that I was, idolized as a kid. And it was a lot of fun. And so I was like, this is definitely something I want to be doing. So as I started kind of growing, I realized, I want to do something different. I gotta break out and kind of find something. And I realized, I'm not going to go find the next, all-star player necessarily, right? I'm not going to be able to scout, and I don't know the first thing about signing an athlete. if I want to pursue that. But I know how to do a deal, right? I've
Hmm.
seen sales and marketing deals happen through the guise of this events group. So I kind of pursued some opportunities, and I wound up working for an Olympic agent in 2007. And so it was, a year and a half after I graduated college, and I started representing Olympians from 2007 to 2009 over the Beijing Olympics. And that was a huge Olympic Games, if you remember. And
Hmm.
we had 14 clients overseas. They brought home something like 20, 21 gold medals. It was a lot of fun, and I got to see that side of the business. But what's interesting is Olympians don't make a ton of money from the Olympic committees. So if you want to pursue that and do it for a long time, you got to make money. You got to do speaking engagements, you got to do clinics, you got to do endorsements. And so I was doing all those deals for them. And what would happen is I'd work with a group and I'd book one of my clients for a speech, and then they'd say, "Great, can you help us with XYZ?" And if they weren't my client, I wasn't going to say no. So I learned how that side of the business worked. And over time, I grew my relationships with other agencies, and I would partner with different groups, and I would book other people's clients. And eventually, CAA came knocking because I had done a bunch of deals with them. They were looking to expand their footprint. At the time, there were only two agents in the entire department. And eventually, I wound up joining the group. I was in the New York office, and started just doing speaking engagements. So I had this background with endorsements, with marketing deals of all kinds, and I wound up just focusing on speaking engagements. Had this background in sports, so I knew that world. But obviously, now I'm working with Gary and a bunch of entrepreneurs, and that expands. So over time, as the people we worked with expanded, my knowledge base expanded, and it became a really interesting thing because 20 years ago, this was a much more boring industry,
Hmm.
right? 20 years ago, it was pretty much all politicians. There were some business people out there, but nowadays, the people who are doing speaking engagements are some of the most interesting people in the world, people from all walks of life. And so it's been a really interesting thing to watch the industry evolve, and to play a small part in that because I think we're trying to stay ahead of the curve and kind of push where things are going and kind of constantly innovate. And that's the Gary way, and that's kind of why we get along so well. Is we like to try things to try to do things differently and disrupt things just a little bit.
I love the story, and I'm curious when you switched over to CAA. That's when you landed Gary as a client, correct? Was
So
that
yeah, Gary was actually a client of CAA's when I
okay?
got there.
Okay, and I
So
was just
when I
curious,
started,
what did he fit into? Like, what
yeah,
niche did Gary fit into when? Because that was a while ago, right? And you said it's evolved a lot since
yeah.
then.
These are my favorite stories because
Yeah.
Gary was the wine guy. And nowadays people know Gary. They don't even know he had a wine show on YouTube. But back then, he was like one of the first stars of YouTube. He saw YouTube for what it was way earlier than most people. And back then he was producing a wine show. He was drinking a couple bottles of wine, not full bottles. Let me take that back. He was tasting a few bottles of wine.
Yeah.
He never even swallowed, and so he would spit the wine out and have fun. And he had this rabid fan base, and it was something where there was obviously something there. He had this great personality, but he wasn't who he is now,
Yeah.
right? He hadn't built VaynerMedia yet, so he launched VaynerMedia in 2009. So back then, he was someone where he wasn't even doing a lot of speaking engagements back then, and his popularity grew. I also think he was very brash. He still is very brash, but I think it was a perspective that was difficult for people because he didn't have this history of huge success. He
Hmm.
built his father's wine business up in New Jersey significantly, but it wasn't until he kind of broke off and did his own thing. He wrote his second book, The Thank You Economy, in 2011, and that kind of I think elevated things on the more thought leadership scale for corporate America. And that was when we got a lot closer. So starting then, when he started doing a lot more speaking, a lot of corporate groups came calling. He was doing deals with some companies where he would do more than one speech. He would do 4 or 5 speeches or regional offices and things like that. And our careers kind of grew together. I don't take any credit for the work he's done because he's the one on stage doing all the hard stuff. And he drives obviously a lot of business just being the personality and self promoter he is and understanding how these platforms work. And he's done a great job of it. And I think one of the reasons we've had a lot of success together is when he was early on, like, again, he wasn't doing a lot of speaking. And as the world's evolved, he's evolved with it. And we've been able to kind of push the boundaries. And so he was always open and willing to getting creative. He was the very first virtual event I had done in 2012 when these weren't a thing. So he's someone who I think saw great opportunity, and we kind of got along very early on because we had a similar personality when it came to customer service and the sales approach and honesty and empathy. And so we hit it off right away. But he was someone when I started, I was like, who is this guy? I've got no idea who he is, what he does. I haven't seen his YouTube show or anything. So I had to get educated just like everyone else.
And do you feel like Gary and yourself innovated the almost we're setting the precedent and disrupting what speaking is and what that role looked like, because it seems like from the wine show and wine library and all the things that he's grown into the
Hmm.
modern Gary Vaynerchuk, which everybody now knows is very focused on media and marketing and sales and social media. But like you mentioned before, that individual did not have the same, I guess, level of awareness, or those individuals were probably not as involved in speaking as they were today. So do you feel
Hmm.
like you've sort of set the path with Gary and this sort of brand in speaking?
Well, again, I don't want to take credit for it because I think a lot of what Gary has done is was thoughtful
Hmm.
and considerate, and he built a career for himself, and I think he did it the way he wanted to do it. I think I helped along the way
Hmm.
negotiate the deals to get him some of those places. I think what Gary did though is give people a lot of permission to be themselves, right?
Yeah.
He was always unabashedly himself, still
Yeah.
is, and
Yeah.
that's my favorite part about working with Gary is who you see on camera is who he is all the time. He is a very kind person. He gives a lot of his time. He's an extremely hard worker. And so these are things that carry on. And I think when he was on stage doing the being himself, a lot of other people were like, "Oh, it's okay to be yourself. You don't have to be a phony."
Hmm.
And the motivational speaking world is kind of what it was, right? There was
Yeah.
the political speakers. Then you'd get the guy who comes in with overalls and a pencil over his ear, right? And he kind of excites the troops, right? And it was kind
Yeah.
of this cheesy thing, and there was almost like a negative connotation to doing that. And Gary doesn't call himself a motivational speaker, and I don't think he is either. I think he happens to motivate people. But the world of quote unquote motivational speakers has really changed. And now, after the 08, 09 kind of recession, what I see was that the industry evolved where it was more about providing value
Hmm.
than it was about being in a big name, right? And
Yeah.
Gary, what he always has built a career on is giving more value than he's getting out of any transaction, any relationship. So very early on, he was helping people. He was giving his best advice out for free.
Yeah.
And as he did that and his career grew, I think other people saw like, oh, this is working. And I think the thing that he had was this authenticity. And then over time, he got incredible credibility. People saw that he knew what he was talking about. The things he was saying was right. The ways he was saying is why he was so successful, right? The way that he was able to get people to think differently. So I don't know that we can take credit for innovating and evolving the industry because I think there's a lot of people who did a lot of things. There's also a lot of external factors that played a role. But I think, we try to at least be thoughtful about what we were doing so that it was an industry that allowed for more opportunity. There are more speakers than ever before. There's more events than ever before. There's a variety of reasons why that's the case. Gary's not the only one, and I certainly am not the reason behind it. But I think a lot of people give Gary credit for inspiring them to do things. And I think his first book, Crush It, really charted that path because it was all about, you know, if you're excited about something, write about it. If you're a writer, right,
Yeah.
for a blog, right, tweet about it.
It's the
Talk about it on a
permission.
podcast,
It's the
do a
permission.
video, and
Yeah.
yeah, and realizing that you actually could have a career on that. He was talking about influencing influencers in 2009. That wasn't a thing, so it was something where he was really kind of pushing the limits of what it was. And again, it was that permission, letting people know that they could do what they want to do. They didn't have to go to a cubicle and work a 9 to 5. They don't want to, but certainly it takes a lot more than permission to be a great speaker. So uh, there's certainly plenty of work to be done.
I want to get into that, but first I want to understand
Hmm.
then your career. You were at CAA, then you chose to work with Gary. So walk me through that transaction and how, Zach became CEO of VaynerSpeakers and what that was all about.
Yeah, I loved working at CAA. Great
Yeah.
people. I'm still very close with all my former colleagues. We talk on a regular basis. We still do business together. But what kind of happened was, um, you know, Gary and I grew closer, and we traveled together for events, and we talk all the time, and we'd share ideas about what we saw and where we saw the industry going. Right? We talk about ways that we thought we could improve the business, and I look at it as Gary's one of the foremost speakers in the world. He's doing 100 speeches a year and has this knowledge base of being someone who's an excellent business person and someone on stage. And let's be honest, he's disrupted many, many businesses. You listed them off. VaynerX, we used to joke like when you'd come to work, there was a new company under the masthead every day because he was just evolving and creating new businesses. And it was something where he sees opportunity. It's hard to run away from that. And we were so aligned on a lot of things, and we had done so much together that it was an easy decision to make, in the sense of knowing that we were going to be able to do things differently, that we were going to have success together, because he's not a bureaucrat, right? He's there when I need him for anything. He's not only my partner, he's my biggest client, which is an interesting relationship. But it's been fun because we get to do things differently. There's no one that we have to ask permission of, and he lends really great support to the entire team and what we're trying to do. And it was something where, I was ready for a change, right? I was ready for something different, for a new challenge. It's not that, CAA was a bad place. It was more like, I want to build something the way I see it.
Mhm.
And I think this has been an industry where over 40 to 50 years, there hasn't been a whole lot to change. And it's a lot easier to change when you start from the beginning rather than changing in the middle of the race. So I think it was a fun opportunity. We started about 2.5 years ago. We've had tremendous success. Obviously, COVID has been a difficult time to say the least. But I'm very excited because I think, what we've built has proven that, we know what we're doing and that we can do things differently,
Mhm.
and still have significant success. And it's been a lot of fun because, obviously when you're doing things and you're building a team, there's certain challenges, but when you're in the dirt with one another, that's where the most fun happens. And so, being in the dirt with Gary is a lot of fun,
Yeah.
because he certainly, loves to get dirty and get creative with this stuff. So we've had a blast.
Awesome. And that it makes sense that if you're shooting ideas off Gary all the time, and then you bring, like, you brought so much expertise from the speaker side, like the combination of his love for building businesses and your traditional training in actually doing this successfully. It seems like a great partnership, and I'm curious what your goal and Gary's goal was for VaynerSpeakers. You keep speaking about disruption and doing things differently and starting from the ground up. What do you want VaynerSpeakers to be? What do you want it to deliver to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, we just want to be the best we can be. We want to be the biggest speakers bureau there is, right? We've got a long way to go to get there, but I think what we've proven is that we can do it. And I think we kind of built the business on the core idea that
Mhm.
no two events are the same. Let's not treat them the same. And the same thing goes for speakers, right? This old world is all about scaling, and you can't scale a business unless you start being robotic and making it all about the transaction. We're trying to lead with empathy and say it's not about making every transaction a transaction. It's removing the transactional element from the deal. And the relationships we built are why we've been successful, right? The relationship I have with Gary is why the company started in the first place.
Mhm.
So we really want to, make a difference, prove that, you can be really successful, you can grow a business. We look at this as saying, if we put some innovative ideas behind it, it's not going to take a whole lot to disrupt an industry that's just old and tired. But we really want to be forward thinking. And so we're always experimenting. We're trying new things. We're trying to be bold. We're trying to be different. Very early on, we made a conscious decision. We weren't going to build the roster the way a lot of other groups do, right? They look and say, all right, who's the mountain climber we can get,
Yeah.
right? Who's check these boxes of people that you represent. We looked at it and said, we want to represent people we believe in, people who are like-minded, people who are connected, and represent them to the best of our ability, help them grow their careers as we grow our business. And like I said, we've had some great successes with that, but the idea is really to build the best business we can be. We're not settling for anything, and it's also something where we look at it and say there's all this opportunity, right,
Yeah.
all over the place. There's more events than ever before. We have 15 clients. We've turned down well over 1,000 people who wanted to be clients of ours because we want to represent the best and we want to be the best representation we can.
So my follow-up question is, through the lens of Vayner Speakers, what should people be doing to get into this
Hmm.
agency? What should
Hmm.
they do to be a paid speaker?
Yeah, well, first off, I mean, again, like I said, we have 15 clients.
Yes.
We're working our way up, so we're not signing everyone,
No, no.
but certainly the emails come in, and we love it. We love that there's a kind of a fervor for this. I think it's a question I get a lot. How do you get into paid speaking? We joke around that it's the best paid part-time job, right? There's certainly a lot worse ways to make a living, but to do it professionally and make it your career does require a lot of time, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of energy. And my favorite part of this is that Gary is a great example. His first speech, he was pouring wine at the event so that they would let him get on stage, right? Who's willing to do that,
That's a
right?
damn good
No,
story
nobody
too.
comes out of the
Yeah.
gate.
I love
And
that.
it's great because if
Yeah.
he's willing to do it and now he can make six figures of doing a speech, well, what's your excuse for not being willing to do
Yeah.
that? So I think people kind of expect that they have a sense of entitlement, and they expect that these speeches would come out of the woodwork. You sign with an agent, you just start handed checks. But the reality is, it takes a long time to build a career. You got to put the time, the energy in. I always tell people, if you want to get started speaking, just go find a stage. Go
Yeah.
speak at a nursing home, right? Go speak at an elementary school. Those are tough crowds, right? You can do it there, you can do it anywhere. And I think you have to hone your message, see what works, make yourself special and different. If you just go out there and just start telling your life story, it's not always going to work. Your life may not be that interesting. You go to a nursing home, I guarantee you it's not going to be as interesting as everyone who's in there.
A hundred
So
percent.
it's
Yeah.
something where you really gotta try it. And I think some people say, I can be a great speaker if only somebody would give me the chance.
Yeah.
Well, make that opportunity for yourself. Call your best friends who have companies and say, hey, can I come speak to your employees at lunch? Right? I'll buy them lunch and then I'll come and speak. Right? Go to your kid's school, speak at career day. Like, do all these things that you have to get out there, because what happens is, maybe not at a nursing home, maybe not at an elementary school, but when you do it at an event, there's always someone planning another event. And eventually people start saying, hey, you were great. Would you mind coming to our nonprofit fundraiser and, just talking about your story, or sharing these details? Would you speak at our chamber of commerce? Would you donate your time? And eventually, after donating your time a lot, you're going to eventually say, I can't because I have commitments. My business is doing so great, or I have another speech. And that's when you can start to say, you know what? If you are willing to offer me $5,000, $3,000, $1,000, pay for my flight, those are the kind of things where suddenly you can say, like, now it can be worth my time. But at the start, you really got to get out there for free. The best way to be paid for speaking is to do it for free. And it sounds kind of contradictory, but it works.
No, you got to put in the reps, and it's like nothing else. But I think that it's just
Hmm.
because people they don't understand speaking. There's a veil there. It's not something that
Yeah.
you go to school for. It's not something most people even get into in their entire career, right? You don't have a mentor. Most people don't have mentors that have a prolific speaking career. So for some
Hmm.
reason, they just think, oh, if I get famous enough or if I am successful enough,
Right.
people are going to start contacting me. And actually, that's a follow up question. If I want to
Hmm.
be a speaker, should I focus on having an exceptional career and then selling that story? Or how would I differentiate if I don't have incredible career milestones yet?
It's a fair question. And I think there's, like, to what you were saying, there's also like the Justin Bieber way of doing things, right? Make yourself a star on YouTube. If
Hmm.
you're speaking, it looks like you're on stage, or you're speaking in your living room, right? If it's good, people will watch it. People then say, hey, I want you to come to our event, right? A lot of people find our other clients by, searching stuff on Instagram, on YouTube, getting forwarded links. And that's kind of, what separates the good from the great, or the bad from the good. And content is king right now, and if
Hmm.
you're producing speaking, it's a great content because people really absorb that stuff right now. They'll watch. Look at the views on TED Talks, right? Millions and millions of views. People are watching. But the difference between a good TED Talk and a great TED Talk can be a few million views, because ideas worth sharing, not all ideas are worth sharing the same, right? Some ideas you want to share a lot more than others. So that's what differentiates, right? Anyone can just get up on a stage and tell their life story.
Hmm.
But if your life story is like 25% of the room, that's not going to be that interesting. You got to find something that's special and different about yourself. Find a message, find some core values that you can impart, because if you're not bringing value to the table, people aren't going to invite you back, right? It's just like anything else. And I
Yeah.
think not enough people really think that through, and they think, like, you know, just the way I talk is going to be exciting. Well, that's sometimes true, but you got to be exceptionally charismatic to carry
Yeah.
it that way. So
Yeah.
really, you got to be someone who has has some message that's really strong, because, right now, if you look back, there's never been more celebrities. And so, you can get a big name to come and speak at a conference, and why would someone have someone they've never heard of? And then when you look at all the kind of other exceptional people who have been out there, like nowadays there's 80-year-old, 100-year-old Olympians. Every one of them have an amazing story. They didn't win an Olympic gold medal because they were a schlub,
Yeah.
right? They spent
Yeah.
the time and they were exciting, and they did something really cool and great. And that's just one aspect of it, right? That's one, core little niche of speakers. So if you look at all of the different competition, it's like, how do you separate yourself? You make yourself different. You make yourself special. And, it's being authentic. It's not just trying to, like, inflate your own ego. It's really recognizing, like, this is who I am, this is what I bring to the table. And then eventually you get to the point where you've established yourself. So you can certainly build your business and then kind of come in laterally and say, like, look what I've done. Like, this is what I should be talking about. But if you're not a business speaker, it doesn't matter if you've never built a business, right? You could be working at McDonald's, but be an exceptional speaker because you have this incredible story, right? Everyone
Yeah.
has it within them, and it's kind of uncovering that, which is not the easiest thing to do, but it's also not an industry where we're not, not everyone needs to be a speaker.
I was going to say, I think that people default to turning their life into one giant hyperbole, but it's really the opposite because if
Hmm.
you highlight all the negatives and the pains and the worst days of your life and you summarize those in a way that tells an impactful story, that's way better than somebody who just speaks about everything in my life worked out, right? Nobody
Right.
needs to hear the yet, like, like the person who had success multiple times, multiple exits, never had any stress in their life. That's not something I can connect with. Like,
Right.
life really sucks sometimes. So if you can find a way to weave those into your story, like you said, if you work at McDonald's, you can still be an incredible speaker if you find a way to tell your story. It's just
Hmm.
about positioning and framing, and like you mentioned, it's practice. You're never going to get it if you don't
Yeah.
practice
Well,
it.
I absolutely think there's something to that. And the sad part of this is there are a lot of people who are suffering,
Hmm.
right? So just because you're suffering doesn't mean your suffering is going to be
It's true
inspirational
too.
to others.
Yeah.
You have to come out the other side. And it's a tough thing to kind of realize because I think a lot of people are like, look what I've overcome. Everyone should want to hear this. But there's just been so much to overcome, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things going on that I think people, I think you're right. They hyperbolize things, but I think it's having some self awareness of where you fit in with what else is going on, right? If
Yeah.
you're going to speak to a corporate audience, you can't come in and tell them all to quit their jobs, right? That's just not going to work, right? You got to recognize who you're talking to. You got to recognize what's valuable. If you're coming in as a recovering alcoholic, and that's the suffering, you've overcome it, and then you built a business. Great, you go and talk to a group of elementary school students. That's not really going to land. So you got to recognize that what you've gone through may not always work. So it has to be a message that's somewhat evergreen, right?
Yeah.
Something that is relatable for others, but there has to be a message. It can't just be a story unless you're an exceptional storyteller.
Good. That's good. Very, very good tips. So if anybody's listening to this and does want to get into speaking, like, write some of this stuff down because you're not going to get a more straightforward answer to getting into speaking. And if you think that there's an easy way into it, or you think you're going to get a paycheck, like, it's just not going to happen. That's Cole's notes. Like, this, I don't
It's
know.
tough.
I've never spoken to somebody who has the resume of various speakers that you have. So it's refreshing to get this insight. It's, I speak to a lot of people that have great sales strategies, marketing strategies, business strategies, entrepreneurs that have raised millions of dollars of funding. But this is like a
Hmm.
very, like you said, a very niche area that people don't really tap into or know a lot about. So, anyways,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, someone told me it was a
yeah,
$4 billion industry. I'd be curious to know if it's still a $4 billion industry after the
yeah.
last year.
So let's
But
let's
I don't
talk
think
about
people
that.
think of it
I'm
that way.
curious how
Yeah.
you've dealt with all of COVID, virtual events. So what has happened to the industry from your perspective?
Well, this time last year, let's think, it was March 11th tonight, right? So this time last year, we were still like, oh, we'll see if this is, going to last a month. So we had to readjust, and it's something where obviously, as a lot of people know, virtual events are kind of a thing. And 10 years ago, people kind of had this idea that virtual events are going to take over. No one's going to show up and hop on a plane anymore. You can do everything via video conference. Remember, Skype was this thing. Well, that never happened, but this has kind of accelerated that.
Mhm.
And we've done virtual events for a long time, right? With Gary, the first event we did, he did a wine tasting with a group. I forget whether it was either in Poland or Hungary. And it was, 5 o'clock in the morning in New York. He's doing a wine tasting with this group of people over lunch in Europe. And it was a wild experience. But after that, we realized there is an opportunity. He doesn't always have to get on a plane. So we've done virtual events for a long time, but they weren't the norm.
Mhm.
And I think now they're the norm. And I think what's going to happen is they're going to become the norm, and there's going to be hybrid events. You're going to see ways where in-person events, those are not going away. People miss being together. No one's figured out networking. If one of your listeners or viewers wants to figure out, the billion-dollar idea on how do you replicate networking virtually, it's out there.
Yeah.
But it's something where these events are going to come back, and I think people will be excited to have them. It was a rough year. I think a lot of people had to adjust. Not everyone can translate from an in-person event to a virtual event. I think a lot of corporations had trouble kind of figuring that out and navigating that, unsure whether or not they should could go to a virtual event. Is that going to make sense? Are people going to stay and watch? Understanding what the implications were for their business. There's a lot of businesses that are built on face-to-face interaction,
Hmm.
right? A lot of salespeople are not used to having to go this way. And so it took a little while, I would say, it took through May to really have the industry kind of rebound in a way where, okay, things are going to happen again. People are paying for virtual events. People are watching virtual events and watching them in droves. We've heard of some great events that we've worked on where, they're like, well, we would get, 2,000 people to come in person, but we got 10,000 people
Hmm.
to watch online. So there's some really great success stories that have come out of this. And I think people have enjoyed it from a perspective of a speaker being like, I didn't have to get on a plane 50 times this year.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice. And on the flip side, it's like, I missed the stage. So I think those events will be back and people will be happy to have them. And there's always great energy at these events, and I think that will be right back where when we can be together again.
Hmm.
But the industry has evolved, and it had to evolve. And I think there are some people out there in our space who are kind of like, I'm just going to wait this thing out. I'll see what happens when virtual events kind of come and go. But I can tell you that the success we've had, we wound up trying to innovate. We built a book club. We were booking a lot of speakers to talk about their books. You'd have a group, a company, say, our sales team is going to read this book. We want your client to come in and do a talk about it. Well, okay, great. That sounds fantastic. They'd love to come in, dialogue with your team. So we basically built something and said, great, you want to do that? We can offer you a product where you can bring in 4 authors throughout the year. We'll provide you books, right?
Hmm.
We'll give you the opportunity to kind of pick from a menu, and then you get to have this great experience for your employees. That's something that I don't think any large corporation would have even considered a year ago. And now it's going to be the norm because people enjoy that. And you know what? Like, you may be working in Ohio and you have a colleague in Ottawa. Well, guess what? You're probably not seeing each other that often. But if you have an experience where you're joining a book club together, suddenly there's also additional value for the corporation. And it's going to cost a lot less than getting those two people together in person. So there's
100%.
value
Yeah.
proposition for a company that there never was before. And we're trying to just really move things forward in that direction because speakers are like the virtual event. They don't love it. Every event's not the same, right? We try to do what we can to make these things special. And people want to be back out there. But there's a place for these events, and they're not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think that there's something to be said for finding, I think, companies that have figured out how to do virtual events in ways that they can build culture and maintain some some level of culture remotely are the ones that people want to work for. They're the ones that are winning right now. Like
Yeah.
they're the ones that there's a lot of employees. We were talking before about, there's massive amounts of depression. There's people that are stuck isolated home alone, but the companies that figure out ways to do book clubs, to do I see a lot of happy hours, and I don't know how effective those are after, the 20th time, but I'm sure there's some that do it better than others. And I've actually seen some businesses pop up that are actually entirely centered on building culture virtually. And the people that sort of
Absolutely.
they accomplish this stuff, and now you have this weapon in your arsenal going forward that, yeah, you're gonna have the in-person stuff, but now how effective are you for your overseas teams? Like, even when I
Hmm.
used to work for a major telco in Canada, Bell Canada, and
Hmm.
it's just Canada, and you still probably only see 10% of the workforce in your years working there because it's, coast to coast. There's hundreds of offices, and even in a technically small geographical location, one country, you still have to find a way to network virtually. And we never had that. Like, we never were able to. It just, the people in the other offices didn't exist. Basically, that's
Yeah.
just how it was. So there's something to be said for this has expedited the industry. It's expedited what businesses have to do, and I think it's just going to honestly be a healthier, more collaborative, better virtual space, both for speakers and for
Hmm.
just corporate communications and whatnot. Whenever this goes back to normal, and I say that in air
Right.
quotes just because I don't know what the new normal will be, and it's probably not going to be the normal that we left, a year and a half ago. Um,
That's right. Yeah.
I have
I
a
mean,
follow up. Oh,
I think
sorry.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I think you're absolutely right. I think I've been kind of joking. It's kind of like animation versus
Yeah,
play, right?
yeah,
When you're on stage, real people, you have to obey the laws of physics. When it's an animated, television show or something, anything can happen. Virtual has kind of opened up the doors for anything to happen.
hmm,
You can do things. You can pre-record. You can insert, video. You can do things in a much different way, and you can open it up. So you can do an in-person event, when things are kind of open back up, and still do it virtually. So
yeah,
that, maybe it's just your home base, but you can stream it to other places. Now, a lot of groups were doing that prior to COVID, but now I think it's going to be the norm. People are going to be asking for that, and people are going to demand that they have access because now they realized they can get a lot of value from something that they maybe previously didn't even know they could enjoy.
And I think that there's actually an expense component as well. Like I've worked with some broadcast companies
100%.
that they were doing like green screen backgrounds, placing two individuals in the same room, having a fireside chat, and to the viewer, it looks like they're sitting in two chairs, and they're actually sitting in their own living rooms, like halfway across the world. Like the things you can do that would actually just save costs and just make things a lot cheaper. If we have the technology to do it right now, which I think is so incredible. Like imagine if COVID happened even like 10 years ago. It would have been a
Oh
totally
yeah,
different it would have been much worse. It would have been much worse.
absolutely. Well, and
Um,
you're not flying people too to an event.
yeah,
If you bring 200 employees to San Diego for a conference,
yeah,
that's 200 plane tickets, 200 hotel rooms,
yeah,
200 cabs in every direction, right? Now it's like, we get calls all the time. We're doing an event next week because
yeah,
what's stopping us? The barrier for entry is really low. You can make it really high end production, but you don't have to. You
yeah.
can do it really simply, and I think people are figuring out that I mean, look, TV networks are figuring it out too. You don't have to do everything to the absolute max. There's ways of low cost ways of providing a significant value. So it's certainly changed the way we do things.
Yeah, no. I just wanted to get your opinion on one more
Hmm.
virtual event topic. As a speaker, how do you master virtual events versus in person? Because I'm sure
It
it's
is tough.
a total, it's so different.
Yeah, well, I'll say so. One of our clients, a fellow Canadian, Scott Stratton, put out a great video last September that I highly encourage people to check out. Lights, camera, in action. It's all about the setup, the virtual
I've seen
setup,
that video.
and he kind of yeah, he pokes fun at it, but I think he does a great job of kind of getting people to think about it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist or an entire AV team to put together a good setup. And I think once you have a good setup, then I think you have a comfort level of I know I look good, I feel good, I sound good. Now you got to make sure that there's actual value there.
Hmm.
There's a lot of I'm going to choose my words carefully. There's a lot of groups out there who are offering like, get Zoom certified, get certified as a virtual
Yeah,
speaker.
yeah.
And it's like, great, how many speeches has the certifier done? Because this hasn't been around for a long time. So I think there's something to it's more of an art than a science. But I think just like speaking on stage, it takes reps.
Hmm.
It's if you're someone who walks around on stage, well, you're not gonna be able to walk around unless you have a camera person in your living room, right? You got to figure out how that works. So it's just like the regular stuff. You got to do reps. Do it. You
Hmm.
can record it and then watch yourself later, right? It's gonna be probably painful, but I think the more you do, the better you get. And I think, especially because it's a world where we see this kind of lasting. If you're going to be an active speaker, you got to figure out what it looks like. I think a lot of people have gone to Q&A because it's easier, right?
Hmm.
It's simpler to say I'm not going to repair anything. I can just answer questions. But I think ultimately their audiences still want a kind of a lecture sometimes, right? There's a time and a place for it.
If
So
you're good at
being
it.
able to be comfortable in front of the monitor, in front of the screen and the camera makes a difference. And people can tell, right? They can tell if you're being authentic or if you're scared. And, you don't get unscared by just, hoping, keeping your fingers crossed. You really got to try it and
That's
practice.
that's the best advice I've gotten on this show. It's so simple, but I love that. That's quotable. Yeah, you don't get unscared just by crossing your fingers or thinking about it. You got to do it. You got to
That's
do it.
right.
And speaking's no different. That's damn good advice. It's so simple. Okay, I wanted to wrap up with some rapid fire
Hmm.
questions just about you and your career.
Sure.
I asked these to everybody. Is there anything else you want to touch on in the world of Vayner speakers, of virtual events, of your career that we didn't go into?
No, I would say, we come check us out, VaynerSpeakers.com. If you are doing an event, if you have questions, call us, shoot us an email. We're here to help, right? That's ultimately what we do. One of my clients told, or one of my customers told me that we actually offer free consulting, and I was like, no, I just want to make sure your event goes well.
Yeah,
So we want to be there. We try to be a resource for everyone out there. So it's still the wild, wild west. So don't hesitate. Let us know if we can help you out.
cool, good, good. So, one lesson that you would tell your
Hmm.
younger self.
One lesson I would tell my younger self.
Hmm.
Um, that's a great one. I think that I would probably tell my younger self to enjoy it along the way. Now, it's not to say that I haven't enjoyed it, but this journey has been a lot of fun. I've done a lot of great stuff, but I think you lose track of time, and I think you also I'm not a workaholic per se, but I work a lot, and I think to be successful, it takes a lot of hard work. but I also think there's ways of doing it where you can separate a little bit.
Mhm.
And I would probably tell my younger self, like, relax a little bit. You're going to get there. You'll be fine.
One piece of career advice that you give somebody looking to pursue a career similar to yours, and pick whichever career you want to give advice for, because you've had a few different things that you've done. So,
I would say you gotta learn everything about the industry. So I worked in sports, and I get a ton of people still who call me and ask me for advice on how do you break into the industry.
mhm.
And you know, it's not easy. You're competing with people who are doing it from you're competing with political science majors and finance majors and English majors, not just sports management majors, right? Everyone wants to work in sports or music or entertainment, but you have to be willing to sacrifice. You have to be willing to learn and be better than everyone else. But you have to be willing to learn about it because there's so much that goes on in the sexy industries, and it's not just the sexy things, right? It's
Mhm.
sometimes it's the grunt work. It's all sorts of back work, sales, right? Sell tickets for a sports team. That's the easiest way in the front door, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but people don't really look around the edges.
Very good advice. Um, what is a resource? It could be a person, a book, a podcast, anything that you have used over your career that's really helped you out that you would recommend people go check out.
So I'll steal from Gary. It's called Google, and it literally has every answer. So I use it nonstop, right? It sounds condescending, but at the end of the day, like I really think you have to learn a lot of stuff yourself. I think a lot of people are looking for the shortcut.
Hmm.
And I know that for me, like I learn stuff all the time that I had no idea how to do yesterday. And it really is just like hunting, right? You become a hunter on figuring out where the information is. So there's not any one resource, but Google certainly provides you with the resources. So I've even created my own search engines using Google, like little things to kind of search certain places. So I think the more you hunt, the more information you're going to find. So that's certainly my number one resource.
It's funny. People that I find across any industry that are the most successful are the most curious. Are the people that are
Hmm.
entirely self-taught in things that even are relatively trivial things. They just figure it out, no matter what. That's a
Yeah,
good answer, though. It's a very good answer. Um, what does success mean to you?
I would say success for me is kind of the respect and gratitude of peers, right? And those I work with. So that means my colleagues, my employees, my clients, my customers. I want them to know I'm working my ass off for them, that I'm doing the best I can for them, and I hope that they see that, right? Because ultimately, sometimes the work we do, in the shadows gets lost.
Mhm.
The time spent redlining a contract isn't something that people watch. You don't get a lot of B-roll of a speaker's agent pouring over a computer, but ultimately, I think success to me is people knowing that we're working hard for them. And it's not just myself, but everyone that's on our team.
That's a very good answer. And then, most important, where can people connect with you? And you already gave a website, but other links
Yeah,
or socials people should go check out.
Vayner speakers across all platforms, right? We follow the lead of our co-founder Gary Vaynerchuk, so you'll find us all over the place. VaynerSpeakers.com. Please check us out. Let us know how we can help you out.